What is good, all of you beautiful people out there? How y'all doing today? That is fantastic. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Double Diesel Sports Podcast, and we are going to be today talking about the AFC North as we head into the 2023 National Football season, which is just a couple of weeks away. But before we get into the video, I'd like to ask, if you have not already, please like, subscribe, and share the video if you enjoy this content or know anybody that does enjoy this kind of content. Really helps boost the exposure, get us out to more eyeballs, more viewers. So if you haven't done that already and you would like to, I would really appreciate it if you do. Also, if you'd like to, go support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Double Diesel Sports. Really helps get food into my belly and help support the channel in that way. So if you like to and you have not done that already, the link for that is in the description down below if you would like to support the channel. But let's get on with the show. So the AFC North, what we're talking about today, is very interesting because it's sort of like a theme where we'll see with a couple other divisions heading into the season where there's two teams that I feel like are clear front runners, or as far as we know they're going to be good, or at least one team and one that can be. And then there's two other teams where there's big question marks around it. They have talent for sure, but there are definitely some serious question marks, some more significant than others. But let's not waste any time. We are going to dive into each position group, rank them in the division 1 through 4, how they stack up against each other. And we are going to start off with the quarterback position. And this one is pretty straightforward. It kind of sums it up in my eyes as far as based on last year, where there are two clear options where we kind of know what they're going to be like, and then two options where there's definite question marks. Joe Burrow is, in my opinion, will forever be the best quarterback in this division for a very, very long time. He is just everything you want in a starting franchise quarterback. He's not the strongest arm in the world, but it's a good enough arm, ridiculously accurate, good to extend the plays, his insane processor. He is the definition of a franchise quarterback. I don't think I need to tell you... I don't think I need to go into super detail as to why Joe Burrow should be still among one of the elites of the league. And Lamar Jackson, I think, doesn't get as much credit as he deserves. I know we like to joke about, Lamar, like, oh, he's a glorified running back, or like, oh, you mean star running back Lamar Jackson and stuff like that. But I feel like he's been very disrespected throughout the entirety of his career as a passer. And a lot of that, some of that is because of him, but also a lot of that was because of Greg Roman's offensive system that luckily they're not going to have to deal with this year. Greg Roman is no longer there, so now we finally get to see what Lamar can be like as a pure passer. And I don't think people give him the respect he absolutely deserves. He has a stronger arm than people think he is. He's more accurate than people think he is. Has a better processor than people think he does. So I think he will take a huge step up this year from a pure passing standpoint. And we saw even back in his days at Louisville when he was lighting it up on the ground. You saw, like, if you actually studied him at Louisville and even throughout his entire career here in Baltimore, he's actually at times shown that he wants to play in the pocket. He's one of these quarterbacks where it's like, yeah, his legs are his best weapon, arguably, but he doesn't rely on them. He doesn't try to just run for the sake of running, where like a lot of these running quarterbacks will tend to rely on their legs more often than not. Lamar wants to play from within the pocket, and if he has to, he will run unless it's on design runs, which, again, because Greg Roman's not there anymore, we won't probably see as much. We'll still definitely see them, but we'll see a lot more of the traditional drop-back passing game with Lamar. So I'm really excited to see what Lamar is like this year, especially after he got that huge contract in the offseason. And now we talk about the question marks, starting with a guy that I think everyone low-key wants to see fail, and that is Deshaun Watson. Yes, I finally have said his name on this channel. Ever since he played on, going back to last year, I have always said, he who shall not be named on this channel for, let's be honest, completely understandable reasons. But I have decided to call him by his real name this year because he is going to be the starter week 1 and presumably throughout the rest of the year. Mainly because they don't have a choice because he is playing on a completely fully guaranteed contract that is completely unmovable. So if he plays as bad as he did towards the end of last year when he actually got onto the field, because he was bad for the Cleveland Browns last year. A lot of that is because he hasn't played football in about 2 years to that point, and there was some definite rust there. And I do think that plus all the stuff going on off the field, I think he just was not good last year because of all those things. Now we will see if last year how he played was a fluke and he's finally got all the rust off and he goes back to the Deshaun Watson that was a legit top 10 to top 5 quarterback when he was with the Houston Texans, or we'll see if that's how he is throughout his entire time here with the Cleveland Browns. I'm hoping for the latter because that would be hilarious and karma at its finest, and I think we would all get a kick out of that. Browns fans probably won't get a kick out of that. The Browns organization damn sure wouldn't get a kick out of it because, like I said, that is a completely immovable contract, and if he's bad this year, it's like, well, tough shit. They're stuck with him, and he's not going anywhere for a long time. So they are banking on him being good this year because they have the roster to compete. It's just, can Deshaun Watson go back to his Houston days? And then we get to Kenny Pickett, who had a decent rookie year last year. He was kind of that classic coming out of Pitt, that high floor, low ceiling kind of quarterback where he's going to come in year 1 and look like a really good starter, but he's probably not going to develop past that. Now, again, same thing where he has some good pieces around him to succeed, so I do think he will have a good year this year. But as far as, do you know if he's going to be a franchise quarterback or like a guy that you win a Super Bowl because of, not just a quarterback you win a Super Bowl with, that is yet to be determined, and it might even be another couple of years until we come to that conclusion. So that's the quarterback situation in this division. And now we are going to move on to the running back position. You know, the guys that are going to take some of the load off of the passing game and take some of the load off of the quarterbacks. And number 1, to me, is clear and obvious with Nick Chubb. I think it's not a controversial thing to say whatsoever that he is the best running back in football. He's just this rare combination of power and speed. Not the most agile guy in the world, but he has this insane home run hitting ability where he could just take a simple dive play that's designed to pick up only 5 yards and break it for a 65-yard touchdown. He is one of the special players in this league. He is the new king of the running backs, with all respect to Derrick Henry. I think Nick Chubb has officially asserted himself as he is the best running back in football. And then we get to his backup, which is sort of like a mini version of Nick Chubb, though not as explosive and not as good, in Jerome Ford. And I feel like calling him mini Nick Chubb is the best way to describe him. You know, he's similar in size and build, but not as explosive, not as fast, not as powerful. He's just a good, solid backup to have if Nick Chubb does go down. You're hoping not, because really past Jerome Ford, you don't have really anybody else. I mean, you have Demetric Felton there, but he's more of like a receiver than he is a running back. So yeah, you're kind of relying on Nick Chubb staying healthy, but going to Jerome Ford in that situation is not, the worst situation in the world. And then we get to the Pittsburgh Steelers at number 2. And I'm sort of on the fence with Najee Harris. There's one half of me that is saying, hey, he's a really good running back. You would be lucky to have him as your starting running back because he is so physically talented. And then there's the other side where I think he's probably one of the more overrated backs in the league, if not one of the more overrated players in the league. He was so highly touted in that 2021 draft. He was a legit first-round talent. I viewed him as a legit first-round talent as well. And, he's been good. Like, I'm not saying he's been like a bust or anything. Far from it. It's just he's not been, that guy that you expect when you spend, you know, the what was it, like the 24th overall pick in the draft on, people say now you don't spend a first round pick on a running back, and Najee is, I'm not saying he's proving that fact right, but he hasn't been the game breaker that I think people were expecting him to be. And I think it could be a situation where it was like with the Cowboys for many years, where Ezekiel Elliott was the clear star running back. He was the number one, he was the bigger name, but I've been saying for years that Tony Pollard was the better running back of the two, and the Cowboys finally realized that last year. I think it could be a same situation here in Pittsburgh with Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, who Jalen Warren, he is kind of what we expected Najee Harris to be, where he has that speed. He has, some power to his game despite being smaller than Najee. He does have that insane home run hitting ability where he could take a small run play and burst it for a 40-plus yard touchdown. And we haven't really seen that consistently, at least from Najee Harris. And I wouldn't be shocked where if we get closer to the end of Najee's rookie contract, where he's taken less reps than Jalen Warren is. This could very well be, Tony Pollard and Zeke Elliott all over again, except for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Because Jalen Warren, I think, does everything not just better than Najee, but more consistent than Najee. I already talked about his home run hitting ability. I already talked about his speed. And he's even a better pass protector than Najee Harris was on passing downs. Because, even though he's a little smaller than Najee, Jalen Warren was stonewalling blitzers in pass protection last year. I really do think, Jalen Warren is going to be this team's Tony Pollard, and it wouldn't be shocked whatsoever where if in the next year or two he ends up being the full-time starter over Najee Harris, or they just let Najee Harris walk and keep Jalen Warren around. I really am that big of a fan of Jalen Warren. And then we get to number 3, and some people might, have a little controversy around this ranking of the Cincinnati Bengals because of, Joe Mixon is one of the 10 best backs in the league. Last year he did take a little bit of a step back, and I kind of expect the same thing here. We all know, it's been reinforced most of training camp, actually the entirety of training camp, of, the value of running backs in the modern NFL, and, how short of a lifespan they have in their playing careers. And, I think Joe Mixon is starting to be a bit on the downtick. He's not as explosive as he once was. He's still really good in the receiving game. He's still a really good back as a whole. But he's not, as good as he was even a year ago. Last year, he started showing signs of decline, and I think it's going to happen. And it's really unfortunate because, you're hoping that Joe Mixon can at least get back to that spot that he was a year ago, because you ain't got shit behind him. Travion Williams is the running back behind him, and, he's just the below average backup. So it really is a situation of if Joe Mixon gets hurt or he's not as good and he takes a serious downtick in production, you don't got shit else from the running game. At least last year you had Samaje Perine to take some of that load off of Joe Mixon, but he left in free agency, so now you have basically nobody. So it really is Joe Mixon and nobody else. And then you get to 4th with the Baltimore Ravens, and it could be surprising because of how good of a running team historically Baltimore has been. But these running backs have not really been as big of a contributor in that production as you'd expect because, J.K. Dobbins has dealt with injuries. Gus Edwards has dealt with his fair share of injuries. It really is just they're good backs. They're talented backs. Dobbins especially. I don't think Dobbins is ever going to be the superstar that we expected him when he came out of Ohio State. They're just good, talented backs, but they just can't stay healthy to save their lives. And, that's really all you can say about the Baltimore Ravens right now. And now we're going to move on to the fun part, the receiving cores. And again, it's just there's one clear number one option in this division, and that's the Cincinnati Bengals. And the only thing I can think of is, in a year or two, this receiving core is not going to look like this anymore. which is unfortunate, mainly because they're not going to be able to afford to keep all these guys. They have legitimately two, maybe three legit number one alpha receivers all on one team. And it is insane. Like, Jamar Chase is viewed as the clear number one in this team. T. Higgins is viewed as a number one. And some would argue that he's even better of a receiver than Jamar Chase is. And, like, I was having that debate last year. I was like, Jamar Chase, he's the bigger name, and he is extremely talented enough to be a number one, and he has shown he can be a legit number one, but I'm like, maybe T. Higgins is this team's number one receiver. It really is, like, it is stupid how loaded this receiving room is with just those two guys. And I think the guy they're going to let walk is going to be T. Higgins, and somebody is going to get a legit Pro Bowl caliber number one alpha wide receiver, whoever that is, because Cincinnati, they can't keep both. They're going to save up to try and keep Jamar or T. They can't keep both. And I haven't even gotten to Tyler Boyd yet, who's been here for a long time, and he's all reliable. Excellent slot receiver, reliable hands. He's just Mr. Consistent. He's like a bigger Wes Welker in a lot of ways. Just very shifty as a route runner, very quick feet, extremely reliable. And he's another guy that I think will be here for a long time. And he's another guy like that trio. I don't think we'll ever see a receiving trio as good and as dominant as what the Cincinnati Bengals have and have had. It's just absolutely insane. And then the talent drop-off happens at the tight end position because their starting tight end listed at the moment is Irv Smith Jr. He was a second-round pick, a third-round pick out of Alabama by the Vikings many years ago. Was never able to stay healthy, and even when he was on the field, wasn't really that productive. He's just very undersized. He's like that borderline, like he looks more like a fullback than he does a tight end or even a wide receiver. He's that classic too small to play tight end, but too big to be a wide receiver. It's just, he's never been super productive, and maybe that'll open up with him, with these other receivers around him. The same thing happened with Hayden Hurst last year, where he was sort of in that same mold, never really productive wherever he went. Then he showed Cincinnati and actually got a little more production than usual, and a lot of that is because they're focused on these other three receivers. So maybe we'll see an uptick in Irv Smith's production, but it's a wait and see there. And then number 2 is the Pittsburgh Steelers, and this is very interesting because on paper, these guys should be more dominant than they are. And I feel like the epitome of that is Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson is quite literally the epitome of he should be dominant but just isn't. He has, again, on paper, all the tools to be a borderline good to great, maybe even star level receiver, where he has that shiftiness. He has good route running. He has good speed. He can make huge plays after the catch. It's just when he can catch the football, and that sort of plagued him his entire career, is, he did clean it up a little last year, but throughout his career, it's always been like he would get like 2-3 drops like a week, and it would just come at sometimes even the worst possible times on critical downs, and it's frustrating because there's a star receiver in Deontay Johnson. It's just, can he get on the jugs machine long enough to work out some of those catch and drop issues? He did clean it up a little bit last year, though it was still a problem. Hopefully he cleans it up completely this year because he has everything else. It's just, he needs to work on the drops. Dropping the football, though, is not an issue for one George Pickens, who, like, is kind of like the opposite of Deontay Johnson, where, Deontay Johnson's smaller, and he's quick, and he's fast, and he's great after the catch. George Pickens isn't like that. He's bigger body guy, kind of slower on the slower side, not like this huge vertical threat as far as being able to stack receivers, not the greatest route runner in the world, but holy shit, he might have the best hands in the NFL right now. Just watch some of his contested catch and his jump ball opportunities. They are some of the most insane and the best contested catches you will ever see a receiver make. And it's that reason why I kind of view him as like baby DK in that sense. Not necessarily because of anything like from a physical standpoint, but just like he's a big enough body receiver where he can just moss guys consistently. And thank God they got him in the second round, because I think he really is going to be the machine that keeps this receiving core moving. So if he takes another step and he does, get better from a route running standpoint, and he could be a legit top 10 receiver in the NFL, and we will view him as one of the elites by year's end. And then Allen Robinson is actually listed as the team's slot receiver at the moment. Allen Robinson, he was a great player in his days early on in Jacksonville, really great player in Chicago. And, he got traded. No, he didn't get traded. He got picked up in free agency by the Rams last year. And, he looked like a shell of himself. He is not the Allen Robinson of old. He's not the ball winner he once was. He doesn't have the big playmaking ability that he once did. He's older, and he's just kind of a shell of himself. And him getting traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers after 1 year in LA, I think could be beneficiary to him, because you don't have to rely on him as your number 2 or number 1 receiver anymore. You can sort of hide him as your number 3 with the skill sets of Johnson and Pickens, and just be a reliable number 3 receiver and not have the pressure of like, okay, I have to be the team's number 2, number 1 receiver. I think that's the best spot for Allen Robinson at this point in time. And then you get to Pat Freiermuth, who is, I feel like, one of the more underrated tight ends in the league at this point. He's not on the level of like a Travis Kelce or a George Kittle or even a Mark Andrews, but he's just like an all-around really good tight end, underrated run blocker, really good catch guy, really good after the catch because he is a bigger body. And he's really fun to watch, and he just makes sense, in this system. He just makes sense as like your classic wide tight end, just not the greatest athlete in the world, not going to be this insane after the catch threat, but he's all reliable. He's sort of like the tight end version of Tyler Boyd in a lot of ways. Just all reliable, throw it to him, and you feel comfortable. He's the security blanket. People view tight ends as the quarterback security blanket, and Pat Freiermuth fits that mold perfectly. And then you get to the Baltimore Ravens, and this is the obligatory we're banking on upside group. Odell Beckham, I don't want to say that we know what Odell Beckham is at this point, because we have no clue what he's going to look like. We obviously know how much of a superstar he was in the Giants. Got traded to the Browns, where it was just a complete disaster there. I still don't know what happened in Cleveland, where it resulted in him not being super productive or really productive at all there. And people thought he was washed up. Some people were saying he was overrated. Then he gets released by the Browns in 2021, signs with the Rams mid-season, and he looked like a man reborn. He started looking like the Odell of old, making insane contested catches, making great plays after the catch. And it helped that like he was a real key contributor to the Rams winning the Super Bowl that year. And I still believe he would have won Super Bowl MVP had he not blown out his knee in that game. And that knee injury, I guess, was more serious than we thought it was, because he didn't play at all last year. He wasn't even signed to a team at any point last year. Some of that was because, of some things he said where he was like, I want to play on a team later in the season, which is sort of like, okay, that's a great way not to get signed. But he finally gets signed. He gets picked up by the Baltimore Ravens. And we will see, can he go back to even that Rams form that he was at, where he's just this great contested catch guy, a guy that can be a true number 1. And, I'm really rooting for Odell to really get back to what he was, because he's such a great guy and he's so fun to watch when he's on his game. And then Rashad Bateman is listed as the number 2 right now. opposite of Odell. And, I'm starting to lose hope on Rashad Bateman. I really liked him coming out of, Minnesota. And, yeah, it seemed like him in Baltimore was just a match made in heaven, where, he had great route running, he had great speed, and I thought he would have been a great target for Lamar Jackson for years to come. And, he did show flashes of that early on when he was healthy, but then he got injured in his rookie year, and then he got injured again in the middle of last year. And he did play in some games where he definitely showed some flashes, but even then it was kind of inconsistent. So I am very nervous on if Rashad Bateman can even stay healthy, let alone perform consistently when he is. So it's a wait and see to see what happens. I'm still holding out judgment on Rashad Bateman until then. But you have insurance a little bit, because if Rashad Bateman doesn't become what you expect him to be, you at least spent a first-round pick on Zay Flowers, who was by far my favorite receiver in the draft. I was clamoring for New England to draft him in the first round if he slid. And, you just watch Zay Flowers at Boston College, and he was like a lightning in a bottle. He was just an insane route runner, insane after the catch, really good hands, incredibly fast, and so shifty in his routes. He was just so fun to watch at Boston College. And, I had heard rumors that when he was performing back at the East-West Shrine game back in February, that the Baltimore Ravens said to him, allegedly, hey, if you're there at pick 22, we're going to draft you. So he was basically penciled in as a Baltimore Raven as far back as January. So, and that's what happened. He slides to 22, and the Ravens scoop him up, and I think he's going to be a star here. I always sort of hold out judgment on rookies because you never know, but I feel pretty confident in saying that Zay Flowers is going to be a stud, not just in Baltimore, but I think he's going to be at some point rivaling Amon-Ra St. Brown as the best slot receiver in the NFL. I really do believe that. And then Mark Andrews, talk about Mr. Consistent. He is considered one of the elite tight ends in the NFL, though he's not the guy that like Kittle or Kelsey is, but he is still just an incredibly good contested catch guy, great running down the seams against linebackers, against safeties. He's just your classic matchup nightmare. He's been Lamar's security blanket, going back to the tight end as the security blanket. He has been Lamar's buddy. He's been his go-to buddy his entire time as a starting quarterback here. And, I don't expect it to slow down whatsoever for Mark Andrews. In fact, I actually think if Odell hits and Zay Flowers hits and Rashad Bateman gets back to what we think he could be, then that actually might open up more opportunities for guys like Mark Andrews, because you can't cover all of them, and all of a sudden this receiving core looks really, really deadly. And then you get to number 4, which is the Cleveland Browns. And I will say, upon looking at this group, it is better than I originally thought it would be. I thought it was just Amari Cooper and everybody else. And Amari Cooper, I'll start with him. He's still, he's up there in age. He's been in the league for a long time now. He's still arguably the best route runner in the NFL. Not the most consistent hands in the world, but he's still really good after the catch. I already talked about his incredible route running. And the fact that they were able to get him from the Cowboys for a 5th-round pick, with how receivers are valued in the NFL now, is just unbelievable to me that the Cleveland Browns are able to pull that off. It is the ultimate low-risk, high-reward. And you saw that last year when he actually, got some decent quarterback play, that he did kind of look a little bit like the Amari Cooper of old. And then you get to the rest of the group. Donovan Peoples-Jones, he's your upside guy. He's the obligatory upside guy in the group, where he's a bigger body guy. In theory, can be a good contested catch guy. In theory, can be excellent after the catch because he does have a little bit of speed to him. But it's just a matter of putting it all together for him. And you're just sort of waiting for him to figure out how to fully play wide receiver and, actually be a good route runner, be a consistent hands guy. You're just waiting for that to happen. And I don't know if it ever will. But if what he is right now, which is just a average to solid number 2 wide receiver, that's fine. You could do worse than that. But with somebody like his tools and his athletic upside, you expect it to be a little more. And then Elijah Moore, they got him in a trade in the offseason from the New York Jets. And he's just sort of, I really liked him coming out of Ole Miss. Very shifty in quick areas, really good hands. He's going to catch it, you throw the ball to him. He does have a small catch radius, so it has to be an accurate ball. But hopefully, if he keeps his head on straight, because, he did deal with a lot of issues with the Jets, as far as like usage and, not having great rapport with his quarterbacks. I mean, I don't know if you remember the Zach Wilson quote he had last year where they asked him, what's your rapport with Zach Wilson? And he's like, I don't know. I don't get the ball thrown to me. So it really is a matter of, can he keep his head on straight from that regard? But if he can, I think he'll be a really good player here. And I think I wouldn't be shocked if Elijah Moore has a breakout year as a result. And then David Njoku, I mean, talk about underrated. I mean, again, he's a guy that has the athletic ability to be bigger and a bigger star than he actually is. Excellent after the catch, not super fast, but really hard to tackle. Really good in contested catch situations. He is inconsistent when it comes to that, though. He's definitely more of a receiver than he is a blocker, despite his size. And he is a really fascinating, athletic, traitsy guy that I do think should be on the up and up this year. We've been kind of waiting for the David Njoku breakout to happen, and hopefully this year is finally the one. But if it's not this year, and he's still what he was in the past few years since he's come into the league, that's still a good starting caliber tight end that can make some big plays for you on occasion. And then you get to the offensive line units for all these teams. And some might be shocked when I ranked the Cleveland Browns at number 1. As was I. I was not prepared to rank the Browns at number 1 when I first went into making this. But then I actually looked at what their starting lineup is going to be per Our Lads. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, okay, Jedrick Wills, he's a really good tackle. Hasn't been as good from his rookie year, but he's still a really good tackle. Oh, yeah, Joel Bitonio's still here. I forgot he was still here. He's still a monster. Ethan Pocic, he's had a really good year last year. And then I was like, oh, shit, Wyatt Teller's still here. Oh, shit, Jack Conklin is still on this team. And I was like, oh, wow, this is a really awesome offensive line. So I was, like I said, I was not prepared to rank this unit number 1, but I looked at this, I'm like, this is a really awesome offensive line unit for the most part. Jedrick Wills, I kind of mentioned it earlier. He's still a really good left tackle. He hasn't developed that much since his rookie year where he was excellent as a rookie. He's kind of stayed at that level, but you're still fine with that because that's still a really good, reliable left tackle to have. And then Joel Bitonio has just been the definition of an elite guard in the NFL. Deletes guys in the run game, just solid in pass protection. He is up there in age, but even if you see it from last year, he has no signs of slowing down whatsoever. Ethan Pocic is probably he's definitely the weak link of this group, but even then, he was like still 3rd among centers per PFF last year out of 36 starting centers last year. And he was rock solid last year. And if that's your weak link in the offensive line unit, then you are living great. Because on the right side, you have Wyatt Teller, who is inconsistent at times, but his best games are games where he is dominating guys. He is excellent in pass protection. Same with Joel Bitonio, where he just deletes dudes in the run game. He is the definition of an asshole as an offensive lineman. And you ask any offensive line coach anywhere at any level, what's the one trait you want in your offensive lineman? and that is he's got to be a nasty asshole. And Wyatt Teller fits that like a fucking glove. And then Jack Conklin was really solid for many years in Tennessee, got the big contract, kind of dealt with injuries last year. But when he's been on the field, he's been really, really good for them. Stepped it up from a pass protection standpoint for the Browns last year. Always been a great run blocker. And I think this offensive line, if they could stay healthy, is going to be what allows this Browns team and this Browns offense to really be successful. Same thing with the Baltimore Ravens, where it's an offensive line that not many talk about, but it's still a really good offensive line. Ronnie Stanley, he's dealt with injuries in the past. He's kind of struggled staying healthy. But when he's on the field, he's legitimately one of the 5 best left tackles in the NFL. And it's not even close in my eyes. So it really is just he's got to stay healthy, because when he is the definition of a franchise left tackle. Tyler Linderbaum at center. They drafted him with a first-round pick last year as a pure center, and he is exactly what they expected. Excellent at picking up pass protection, excellent at pointing out blitzes. Not the greatest run blocker in the world, but solid enough as a pass protector. He is just the prototype center, and that is exactly what they wanted. That's what they expected when they drafted him, and that's exactly what he's been. Excuse me. And then Kevin Zeitler has just been the model of consistency. He is up there in age. He's not the borderline elite guard that he was in his prime, but he's still an excellent starting caliber guard that many teams could kill for. Like, so many teams in the league would kill for a guy like Kevin Zeitler. And he's here and still just as good as he ever was. Same with Morgan Moses, where, again, he's up there in age. His best days are behind him, which is saying a lot, because he was a great player for the Baltimore Ravens last year. They got him in as like a cheap signing, nothing big or splashy, but he was just so freaking good and consistent for them last year. And it really was encouraging to see Morgan Moses, still be that player after all these years. And then you get to number 3, the Cincinnati Bengals. This is an offensive line that has dealt with changes over the past couple of years. They made the Super Bowl a couple of years ago with an offensive line that would get anybody killed, and they still almost won the damn thing despite it. So offensive line was something that they really have taken seriously in trying to really build up, and that even includes this past offseason with the signing of Orlando Brown Jr., who's wanted for many years to be a starting left tackle. He's wanted top left tackle money. Kansas City was not willing to give that to him. Cincinnati was. And, he's just a really good, not like a superstar left tackle that he thinks he is, but he's just a very good to borderline great left tackle that they are happy to have there. And we'll see if the contract works out for them. And then he moved inward. Cordell Volson is the left guard. He is the clear weak link of this unit, and he's just average at everything. Average run blocker, average pass blocker. He's just what you see is what you get, and there's nothing special about him whatsoever, and he will lose quite a bit. So he is definitely somebody that needs help from a double team standpoint. If you leave him one-on-one with like these elite defensive tackles like Chris Jones is, like the Aaron Donald still, he's going to lose if he's one-on-one with those guys. And then you get Ted Karras, who is he was a solid to good player for a while in places like New England and Miami, and now he is the starting center for the Cincinnati Bengals. He was a part of the free agents from the 2022 offseason. And again, it's just he's sort of been the same player where he's just overall solid. Nothing too crazy, nothing too special, but you're just happy to have him, and you could definitely have worse. Alex Kappa, they signed him in that same free agent signing class from 2022 from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he's been a really good player for them as well. He was an excellent player in Tampa, has been as excellent in Cincinnati last year as he was in Tampa, but he was still a really good player and definitely an upgrade over Michael Jordan, who was just the guard Michael Jordan, not the famous Michael Jordan. Um, but yeah, he's been really, really good, and I think he should only get better this year. And then Jonah Williams is probably the biggest question mark. They spent a first round pick on him many years ago, and he hasn't been able to stay healthy. And when he's been on the field, he hasn't been as good as they expected him to be. I'm not even shocked if once his rookie contract's up, they just let him walk, because he really has just sort of been like underwhelming as a first round pick. And then you get to the Steelers, and it's a clear, bottom tier team from an offensive line standpoint. Dan Moore is listed as the starting right tackle, not Broderick Jones, who they spent a first round pick on. And I think that actually might be the best situation. Those Steelers fans hated Dan Moore. I agree he's not a guy that should be a starting left tackle, at least long term, but he's solid enough where you can keep him for the short term at least, while Broderick Jones sits behind him and develops, and then you can slowly ease Broderick Jones into the starting lineup over Dan Moore. But having Dan Moore as the week 1 starter over Broderick Jones, I'm not against it, but I can understand why that'd be frustrating to Steelers fans. And then you get Isaac Seumalo, who they signed in free agency. I'm kind of shocked that they signed him, because to me, he's, just as good as Kevin Dotson, who's already on this team. In my opinion, Kevin Dotson might actually be better than Isaac Seumalo. But they brought him in, and he's, like I said, he's just as good as Kevin Dotson. So if it's a situation where if he gets hurt or somebody gets hurt, Kevin Dotson can slide in, and you could still get really good left guard play where they're both, just brick shit houses of humans that can move guys easily. A bit shoddy at times in pass protection, but they are just the leaders in the run game. So it is weird to have two guys on the offensive line that are kind of redundant with each other, but it's not, in theory, the worst idea in the world. And then Mason Cole is listed as the starter. They brought him in last year in free agency, played really well. He's really fine. He's just sort of like the baseline of what you expect, bare minimum, out of a starting NFL center. And plus, anything's better than Kendrick Green, who has just been a bust, which is weird calling a third-round pick a bust. But, Kendrick Green has just not been good in the NFL. So Mason Cole is definitely a step up from Kendrick Green. And then James Daniels was a really good player for a while in Chicago, and came to Pittsburgh last year. And is, again, it's really good, sound, not a superstar, but just a really good, sound, starting caliber guard that also has center flexibility, which is really nice. And then you got Okafor, who's just sort of just the sort of like Mason Cole, where it's just like he's the bare minimum of what you expect out of a starting right tackle, but you definitely expect better. So yeah, the Steelers are a clear bottom tier as far as the offensive line in this division, and probably one of the more underwhelming units in the entire league for that matter. And then you get to the defensive line, and holy shit, I just want to talk about Cleveland for a second. Cleveland, outside of Myles Garrett, had one of, if not the worst D-lines in all of football last year. And they just were horrendous in all facets outside of Myles Garrett, from a pass rush standpoint, from a run defending standpoint. They were just miserable. So they revamped the fuck out of this line. They brought in Dalvin Tomlinson, who is just a massive human being who's going to help out and run defense in tremendously. They brought in Shelby Harris, who's up there in age, but still an excellent player at his age. And then they brought in Cedarius Smith, who is sort of the opposite of them, not a willing run defender, but is still a dominant pass rusher. And you take those guys and match them up with Myles Garrett, who is arguably the best pass rusher, if not the best pass rusher in all of football. Holy shit. I'm not joking when they say they revamped the fuck out of this defensive line. And I would argue that this is probably the best defensive line, at least on paper, in all of football right now. It's incredible what the Cleveland Browns are able to pull off with that. And then you get to number 2 with the Pittsburgh Steelers, And they're also really damn good from a pass rushing standpoint. TJ Watt, I don't think I really need to say anything about TJ Watt. We know how great he is. We know how great of an athlete he is, how much of a game wrecker he is. There's nothing really to say about TJ Watt that we don't already know. But what I do need to say is that Alex Highsmith on the other end of him is really just a baby TJ Watt. He's just as talented physically and just as athletic as TJ Watt is, but just nobody talks about him for whatever reason. He's just as bendy. He's just as quick off the ball. He's just as fast. He's just as much of a game wrecker as TJ Watt is. And yet nobody seems to talk about him. And the Steelers gave him an extension in the offseason, and it was much deserved. He's the best player in the league that nobody talks about for sure. And then you go interior, Larry Ogunjobi. Last offseason was really weird for him because he got a big contract for the Chicago Bears to be their starting 3-tech, and then he failed his physical and then didn't get signed by the Bears. Pittsburgh ended up picking him up. And, he's just a really good defensive tackle, starting caliber defensive tackle in the league. Just solid at everything he does. And I'm actually glad he didn't go to the Bears because I feel like people would have shat on him with the contract that they had originally offered him. But here in Pittsburgh, with the deal he's on, he's just a very good player. And then Cam Hayward, he's old as hell, but he's still as dominant as ever. From a pass rush standpoint, he is still as good as he ever was. Maybe not as dominant in his prime, but he's still like one of the best pass rushing defensive tackles in the league, at least from a top 5 pass rushing DT standpoint. And he's the leader of this defense. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He is just such a great player to still have here, and he's still this productive at his age. And then they spent a second round pick on Keanu Benton, who it looks like they're going to try and play him at nose tackle. I do think he's a little undersized to play a pure nose tackle. He definitely is set up to be the successor of Cameron Hayward when Cam Hayward eventually retires. Because he basically is Cam Hayward. He's very explosive off the ball with a bunch of different pass rush moves that you don't expect from a bigger guy. So he's going to be playing nose this year, but he's basically the successor to Cameron Hayward, which is a great succession plan to have because I think Keanu Benton can fill his shoes tremendously. And then you get to Cincinnati, maybe underwhelming on paper, but still really, really good. Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard are really good. Not like the most upside heavy pass rush tandem, but they're still really good, really solid. Trey Hendrickson is, again, one of the more underrated players in the league. Got a big contract after he had a breakout year his last year in New Orleans. And, people were screaming overpay for a guy that was basically a one-year wonder. But he has come into Cincinnati, and he has been excellent for them since he's ever put on, the orange helmet with the stripes on him. And Sam Hubbard has kind of been the same thing. Has dealt with injuries for a little bit, but he is just excellent as a number 2 edge rusher. Doesn't have the physical tools to be a pure number 1 alpha rusher at any point in his career, but he is just an excellent, good number 2 to have. And then you go into the interior. DJ Reader is just probably the best pure nose tackle in the NFL. He's just the definition of a space eater, better pass rusher than people would expect a nose tackle to be. And he is just the big plug that you put in the middle, let him eat up bodies to let all these other guys in the front 7 go after and eat. And then BJ Hill is a really good player in his own right, sort of like a smaller version of DJ Reader. Better athlete a little bit, better pass rusher, but, just as good as DJ Reader in my eyes. And then the Baltimore Ravens, listed as my 4th ranked pass rush in this division. And that might, surprise some people because that's sort of been, Baltimore's thing is having good front 7s and having good D lines. But, there's a lot of question marks with this group. Starting with Odafe Owe, who's a traits-based guy. They spent a first-round pick on him a couple of years ago from Penn State. And he's a really good edge rusher. You expect that when you have a traitsy guy going to the Baltimore Ravens. You expect him to be really good. But will he ever be an alpha? Probably not. I don't think he's ever going to be that. He's just too small to be like a true dominant alpha number one edge rusher. But then you get to the other side, which is Tyus Bowser, who's just, he's the definition of fine. He's sort of good at everything, not great at everything. He's just sort of the baseline of what you expect out of a Baltimore edge rusher. They're hoping David Ojabo can come along and overtake Tyus Bowser for that spot. Like, he's the guy that there's the most intrigue around David Ojabo. And you're just sort of hoping that he can get it along and come back from his injury and really showcase the potential that he showed at Michigan and overtake Tyus Bowser, because David Ojabo has higher upside than Tyus Bowser. But Bowser's listed as the starter at the moment, and he's just sort of fine. Again, one of those guys is what you see is what you get. And then you get Michael Pierce, who's listed as the nose tackle at the moment. Excellent player. Like, he really is like one of the more underrated game-wrecking players in the league, but he could just never stay healthy. He's dealt with injuries these past few seasons. He sat out for COVID, and it's just, you expect him to play no more than half the games in the year, and he's great when he's out there, but you don't know how long he's going to be out there for. And then Broderick Washington is just sort of this traits-based guy, again, sort of in the same realm as Tyus Bowser, where he's average to good at everything, but not great at any one thing. Nothing really much to say about him. And then Justin Madubuike is sort of like, if Michael Pierce can stay healthy, is the perfect complement to Michael Pierce. And Justin Madubuike he's going to be another one of those guys where he's a really good player, great athlete, really quick off the ball, really good pass rusher with good pass rush moves, good enough run defender. He's going to be another one of those guys like Alex Highsmith that nobody talks about, and then he gets this big contract extension, and everybody else is like, who? But Ravens fans will look at it and be like, oh yeah, he was worth it. So Justin Madubuike is definitely one of those guys for sure. But yeah, from a Baltimore Ravens standpoint throughout their history, you expect, better pass rushes. We've seen better pass rushes. So seeing them at the bottom of the AFC North as far as that goes is definitely shocking to some. And then we move on to the linebackers, which is going to be very interesting because the linebacking core, or just the linebacker position in general, is never really viewed as like this high upside game breaking position in the modern NFL. But there is one guy that is as close to that as you could possibly get, and the Baltimore Ravens have that in Roquan Smith, who they got in a midseason trade last year from the Chicago Bears. Was a really great player in Chicago for a while, but then he comes to Baltimore, and it's like, I remember somebody said it's as if Roquan Smith showed up to Baltimore and the ghost of Ray Lewis overtook him or something. He just became a different level player as far as his game-breaking ability. He's almost like improved as a coverage player since he's arrived here all of a sudden. He's really has just asserted himself as one of the 3 to 2 best linebackers in the NFL last year. And he's the perfect guy for Patrick Queen to be paired up with. Because Patrick Queen, he was a first-round pick a few years ago, was a part of that great LSU Tiger team in 2019, was drafted by the Ravens in the first round, and it looked like a match made in heaven. But, Patrick Queen has just sort of like, we always expect him to make the leap to assert himself as an elite caliber linebacker that we all know he has the physical traits to be, but he just never, ever got to that. He's a little too reckless. He has that see ball, hit ball mentality, and he has that mindset of like he's going somewhere really fast, but he doesn't know where he's going. He's just going to get there fast. So he was sort of kind of held back in that result here in Baltimore because they relied on him as being the number one linebacker. Well, with Roquan Smith here, they don't have to rely on him doing that, so he could just be exactly what he was. And that's kind of what he was at LSU, where they just sort of said, like, hey, forget about what you're responsible for. Just find the ball, run around, and try and make a play. And I think that's the best spot for Patrick Queen to be in. So nobody benefited from the Roquan Smith edition more than Patrick Queen, and he saw that when he arrived last year, how much it improved Patrick Queen's game as a result. And then you get to number 2 with the Cincinnati Bengals. Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt are probably the most underrated. Actually, not one of the most. They are the most underrated linebacking duo in the NFL. I mean, they were a key piece to that defense during the Super Bowl run. And same thing last year, where they're not superstars. They're not traitsy players. They're not these great athletes, but they're both really smart veterans who have been in the league for a while, and they're good enough in coverage, good enough in the run defense, and they are just good enough to make sure everybody's in their spots and just keeping things locked down. And I sort of lump them both into that because they're both kind of like that. And I don't know what this defense would look like without these two. I think these two are that vital to this defensive unit succeeding. And then you get to the Cleveland Browns at number 3. JOK is definitely the bigger name of these two. He's the one that fans are the most hyped about. I mean, he had all that hype around him when he was coming out of Notre Dame in 2021. Some people thought he was going to be a first-round pick. The Browns ended up getting him, in the middle of the second round? So it was viewed as a steal at the time. And he's sort of the prototypical modern linebacker, where he's too small to be a typical linebacker, but he's also too big to be a pure safety. So he's sort of like one of those hybrids. He definitely plays like a more of a linebacker than he does a safety. He's a very good coverage player, not a good run defender because he is so small. But he is sort of the definition of the modern linebacker. And then Anthony Walker is sort of in that same realm, though not as good of an athlete as JOK. And he's just sort of a definition of a good to solid linebacker, Again, I've said this already in this video. I sound like a broken record, but he's, again, just one of those guys where he's good at everything, but not great at everything. He's just the definition of a fine starter that you can do better than, but you're happy to have him while you have him. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers, same thing, are just a clear bottom tier. This is actually one of the worst linebacking groups in the NFL on paper. Cole Holcomb was a big guy they brought in free agency. Is a fine starter for the Commanders. They don't make him this big anymore. He's sort of the old school linebacker where he's a bigger guy, bigger body, more of a thumper than he is a coverage player. But even then, he's still a fine coverage player. But again, it's just sort of like he's their best linebacker, and it's just sort of ugh. And then a Landon Roberts, who he is also another one of these old school linebacker types where he's going to come downhill and be a thumper. But holy shit, is he terrible in pass coverage. I mean, you saw that from his days in New England. You saw that from his time in Miami, where he is a great run defender, but just a horrid pass defender. And that's going to really hold this group back and maybe even hold the Steelers defense back as a whole, because he's going to get exposed in coverage situations if they ask him to do that. And then you get to the last part, which is the secondary units. And this was kind of difficult to rank because, there are definite holes in all of these groups, but there are also some really great pieces in most of these groups. And I eventually settled on this ranking, which has the Baltimore Ravens at number 1. Marlon Humphrey, I feel like, is almost underrated. People don't talk about him as one of the elite corners in the NFL, but he is one of the most well-rounded DBs in all of football. Great speed, great zone IQ player, excellent man-to-man coverage player. He's one of those guys that you just put on their best receiver and you feel comfortable he can take them out of the game. So he's very underrated, and nobody talks about it that much, but he really is one of the elite talents in the league. Same with Marcus Williams, who's at free safety. And, it sucks that his most memorable play is, botching the tackle on Stephon Diggs during the Minneapolis Miracle. It's ironic that that's what he's known for, because he really is one of the safest, most reliable, most conservative, or I don't know if conservative is the right word for it, but he's one of the more safe defensive backs or free safeties in the NFL, where he doesn't let a whole lot of big plays get let up behind him. He doesn't let any guys go past him. He's very sound. He's a very good tackler. He's a great IQ player from a zone perspective. And, he's been a really good safety that they've had here in Baltimore. And they haven't had great safety play like this in a while. So the fact that they have Marcus Williams here is a godsend. And then they drafted Kyle Hamilton in the first round last year. And I will say Kyle Hamilton got a little more hype last year in the draft than I think was warranted. People were hyping Kyle Hamilton up as like the next like Sean Taylor or Ed Reed, where he's just this insane, rangy free safety. And he's just not that. He's more of like a box strong safety, that can play slot corner. And the Ravens clearly viewed him as such as well, because they played him a lot in the box. They played him a lot as a slot corner last year. And he thrived in that role. And I think they're going to keep him in a similar role like that. And, and that's the best for him, because he's not this insane athlete that everyone thought he was coming out of Notre Dame. He will let plays bust every now and then. But he's such a great tackler. He is such a big body. He does have some instincts from a playmaking perspective. But here in Baltimore, they know how to use him properly, and they know how to use him successfully in that role. So he's in the perfect spot for him. And then Rock Ya-Sin is listed as the number 2 corner at the moment. And he is definitely a downgrade from Marcus Peters, though he does play fairly similarly to Marcus Peters, where he's just sort of like a guy that's going to let a lot of big plays up, but he will make some splash plays every now and then. And, having him as a number 2 corner is fine. You could definitely do worse. But from a slot corner perspective, it's hard to be worse than Arthur Mollett, who they signed him from the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, he's very physical. He's a physical run defender, physical player, but he is borderline dog shit in coverage. So, you don't expect much out of Arthur Mollett. And then you got the Cleveland Browns at number 2. And this was another group that was like kind of with their offensive line as well, where I was like, oh, this group is much better than I thought it would be. Denzel Ward is, again, in that same conversation as Marlon Humphrey, where he's one of the elite corners in the NFL, but nobody really seems to talk about him like that. And, the Browns defense as a whole was really not that good last year, but Denzel Ward wasn't responsible for that. He's still a guy that you just put him on their best receiver, and he is going to guaranteed take them out of the game. He's so technically sound. He's such a great athlete. They gave him a big contract extension for a reason, and he is going to be this team's he is going to be one of the premier corners in the NFL for years to come, and he is definitely the best guy they have here. And Greg Newsome, who they spent a first-round pick on a couple years ago, he's really an excellent number 2 corner. By year's end, I wouldn't be shocked if people say he's the best number 2 corner in the league, where he's, again, another really good athlete, very sticky in coverage, a bit undersized, but that's not the worst thing in the world. And he's just a very technically sound, good athlete, good corner with high IQ that is just sticky as all hell. And he's the perfect complement, I think, to a guy like Denzel Ward. And then Martin Emerson is listed as the slot corner at the moment. And he's another one of those guys where it's like he has similar instincts from a playmaking standpoint to Denzel Ward, but he's very sticky, very physical, and he is an excellent slot corner. He's the complete opposite almost of Arthur Mollett. And so this is a really good corner trio that Cleveland has. And then the safety duo is a bit to be desired. Juan Thornhill, who they signed in the offseason, he's just the definition of fine. You could do better than him, but you're happy to have him for right now. He hasn't been as good as the Chiefs expected when they spent a second-round pick on him. He's just been fine. Grant Delpit was also a second-round pick by the Cleveland Browns, and he got injured his rookie year, missed his entire rookie year, and then he played well last year, and I do think Grant Delpit is on the up and up, and he's going to be a guy that I think by year's end is going to be viewed as like, hey, he can be like a top 10 safety potentially. He has the ability, he has the upside to do it, and I think he will. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers, Patrick Peterson is the number one corner at the moment, and I'm nervous because how much longer is Patrick Peterson going to be a good NFL corner? He was elite at his peak, obviously. What was it, like 10 straight years where he was elected to a Pro Bowl in Arizona. Goes to Minnesota where, he has a bit of a career resurgence last year, but they ran a lot of zone there. And now he's going to a team that runs predominantly man-to-man. And it's sort of like, can he, at his age, not being the athlete that he once was, can he hold up consistently in press man coverage? My guess is probably no. If you were talking to like Patrick Peterson even 5 years ago, I would have said absolutely yes. But right now, I don't know if he can anymore. And then you have Levi Wallace, who's listed as the second outside corner. And, he's just the definition of solid and fine. He's not going to give up that many plays, but he's also, a guy that teams are going to pick on a couple times, but he's fine. Chandon Sullivan is listed as the team's slot corner. I don't know why, because he wasn't really that good as a slot corner in Green Bay last year, so I don't really get why he's the slot corner this year. If it was up to me, I feel like their best corner trio would be Levi Wallace in the slot, Patrick Peterson on one side and the outside, and then Joey Porter, their second round pick, on the other side. I feel like that would be a great landing spot, or not a great landing spot, but like a great trio instead of having Chandon Sullivan out there where he's the clear weak link of this entire group. And then you get to the safety room, and Minkah Fitzpatrick, again, he's one of those guys where I don't need to say much about him. We know how great Minkah is. He's such a great athlete. He's so rangy. He's such a big playmaker. He is the best. He is, outside of TJ Watt, the best defensive player on this defense. And if they lose him, then that's a huge loss for them. And then Damontae KZ, they're going from Terrell Edmonds, They're going from Terrell Edmonds to Damontae KZ at strong safety. And, it's weird that they're playing him at strong safety because he is undersized to play the strong safety role, but he's just solid all around, very good range. Again, we're going to go back to the line of the video. He's good at everything, but not great at everything. He's just the definition of a solid starting caliber safety. And then we finally get to the Cincinnati Bengals at 4. And man, this safety room is or not just the safety room, but this secondary as a whole has taken just a complete downtick from what it was last year, where they were legit one of the best secondaries in the league. Cam Taylor-Britt is listed as one of the starting corners, along with Chidobe Awuzie, who Chidobe Awuzie was one of the 10 best corners in the NFL with the way he was playing last year, and then he got hurt in the middle of the season, and his presence was definitely missed as far as they didn't have that guy anymore that was like a true number one caliber corner. But they're going to have him back healthy this year, and hopefully he can play as well as he did last year. And then Cam Taylor-Britt was a guy who they drafted in the middle of the draft. I think it was last year, if I'm not mistaken. And, he's just fine. And he hasn't gotten a lot of starting reps. But if he does, hopefully this year he could take a bit of an improvement because he has the physical tools to play it. So I'm hoping for Cam Taylor-Britt to really take a step up this year and be a good number 2 corner opposite of Chidobe Awuzie. That'd be the best case scenario. Mike Hilton is the team's starting slot at the moment, and he was a really good slot corner in Pittsburgh, borderline great slot corner in Pittsburgh, and sort of did the same thing last year in Cincinnati. So you're expecting the same thing out of him, which is a really good starting slot play. And then we get to the safeties, and this is where the team has taken the biggest hit because both Jesse Bates and Von Bell left in free agency. And these guys are going to be huge misses, and they've had a bit of downgrades at both positions. You know, Nick Scott, who they signed in the offseason, he's replacing Jesse Bates as the free safety, and, I mean, you go from one of the elite safeties in the NFL to one of the more average starting caliber safeties in the NFL, and Nick Scott, who, has some range, but he's not really, that rangy, that fast, decent tackler. It's a huge downgrade. Dax Hill, I am intrigued of his upside, though. He was one of the best safeties in the draft last year, and he was a really fun watch at Michigan, so he's finally going to get the chance to be a full-time starter this year, and I'm really excited to see how Lou Anarumo deploys Dax Hill and how they use him. He really is a guy that could play him at either strong or free safety. He has the ability and the athletic talent to play both. So I'm really excited to see how Dax Hill performs now being a full-time starter. And that is going to put a wrap on the AFC North preview for the 2023 season. And stay tuned for the next couple of days where we will be getting out the NFC North preview. We'll try to be banging these out over the next couple weeks, heading into kickoff for the 2023 season. And like I said at the start of the video, if you have not already, please like, subscribe, and share the video if you have not already. And if you'd like to support the channel on Patreon, the link to that will be in the description down below. With that being said, I'm Double Diesel. Peace.